Okay, so here we are at Kalinga Literary Festival today, and what a beautiful day it is because it's Valentine Day, a day where we celebrate love and romance. And none other day could have been better to talk about this very beautiful, wonderful book that we are going to talk about today, and also the author whose labor of love gets reflected through this book. The book we are talking about, ladies and gentlemen, is The Longest Kiss, The Life and Times of Devika Rani, written by Kishwar Desai, who's present with us today. Kishwar, first of all, welcome on board.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rakhee. Lovely to be here.
And thank you so much to Kalinga Literary Festival. I've been doing their sessions, and I think the kind of work they bring across to the audience through this digital platform right now, though they have been doing offline work for many decades and years, I think is a wonderful idea that where we celebrate literature, and through literature we celebrate different aspects and dimensions of life itself. So let's not waste much time. And ladies and gentlemen, whoever is watching here, all the very best to you on this day today as we celebrate life, the courage through the life and time of Devika Rani, the legendary actress whose work, how beautifully Kishwar Desai has penned in this book. So Kishwar, first of all, why Devika Rani that you looked at when you thought of writing this book?
Yes, I must thank Kalinga Literature Festival for organizing this on Valentine's Day because Devika Rani's life has been for me a wonderful journey to explore. Basically, because hers has been, yes, a very romantic life because she had many loves, many loved her. But I think the most important thing about Devika, and which is why I wanted to write this book, is not only was she a great actress. Many of you may not remember because I'm sure many in the audience are far too young to know too much about her, but she was a star in the 30s and the 40s of early Indian cinema. But that what I realized is when I started doing the research, that there was very little written about her, even though her contribution to Indian cinema was immense. Not only was she the great grandniece of Rabindranath Tagore, which meant that she came from a very illustrious lineage, she also was not only an actress, she was also a designer, she was a great singer, and she also wrote the screenplay for the first film in which she acted, which is called Karma. The main thing here, Rakhee, which has always puzzled me, is that both Himanshu, that is her first husband, as well as Devika, worked on the globalization of early Indian cinema. And this is something we've all forgotten. You know, today when we see a film going for the Oscars or being released in Europe or in UK, we all get very excited. What we don't remember is that in the 1920s, Himanshu Rai's films were already being screened all over Europe and even in New York, as far away as New York. And Devika's first film was premiered at the Marble Arch Theatre in London, in which she got rave reviews. And Rakhee, the unbelievable fact is that no Indian actress has ever got the kind of reviews that she got. And that was 90 years ago in 1933 in the film called Karma. So I was very intrigued by their lives, and I felt that when we talk about Indian cinema, we need to take great pride in it. And we also need to remember that these were the pioneers. She was a pioneer, but her life was not an easy life. And that is why I felt that a biography needs to be written about her, collecting all the documents and data, which was very, very tough to do. But in order to honor a woman like her, because it was not something that, you know, she felt. She had her ups and downs. There were very, very tragic moments in her life, but she was a survivor. And I think these are the elements that I wanted to bring out. The fact that she was so superbly talented, the fact that their cinema was global, and they were making cinema for a European audience much before anybody else did, and the fact that even though she had to work very hard and suffer a lot, she was a survivor. So these were the things that I wanted to bring into this book, and I do hope that I have managed to do so.
I can tell you and to all the viewers and to you, Kishwar, that I have personally read it and I'm super, super impressed by the book because too many layers, I think, that you unearth through this book also. You also talk about the cinema industry of those times, the whole structure of it all also. And, so there are too many things you're demystifying also, the whole entertainment industry, cinema in particular here, the characters there, the players there, you touch upon them, and it becomes a very holistic kind of experience when you read the book. It's of course through Devika Rani. I think you touch upon these different elements. So talk about that whole feeling and the whole research also that you have really painstakingly gone through, done it, and congratulations for that, Kishwar. Talk about that era of filming or filmmaking,
Yeah.
and how it was.
Uh, First of all, I want to say, Rakhi, it was a very, very, very tough experience to research this book. It has taken me 15 years to just put together all the material because of the fact that in India we don't have proper archives. You know, a lot of the archives are scattered, and Devika led a very global life. And so, as a result, her archives are scattered all over the world, as it were. So, I had to track down the material in different places. And it was difficult because some of the material is with people who refused to share it unless I paid them a large sum of money. So I had to experience that as well, but I couldn't pay them. And therefore, I thought, because a writer's life is not one of many millions that you can just share. So I had to go out there and do my own research, my own hard work. But I always felt that Devika was by my side because, her story and her part of the narrative, as has happened with many Indian women pioneers of early Indian cinema, we have completely forgotten them. So I thought that it is so important I do this. So I pieced together. I went to various institutions. I started with the National Film Archives. They were in Pune. They were extremely helpful. I went to New York, to the Roerich Museum there. I met many people whose members of their family were associated with Bombay talkies in Bombay. I went to Bangalore, which is where, she lived for many years at the Tataguni estate. I went to Nagar, which is in Himachal. I went to Australia. I went to so many places. But ultimately, I think the book fell into place when I discovered her letters. So the crux of this book, the main spine of this book is based on the letters she wrote to Svetoslav. So this is very important, Rakhi. This book is authentic. It is not based on gossip. It is not based on hearsay. Because the other thing which is very painful for me was that whenever I read an article about Devika Rani, I always found that it was written from the male point perspective, the male point of view, and very often it was not very complimentary. People used to blame her for the demise of Bombay talkies. People would blame her for killing her first husband, which she is not responsible for. And there would be all kinds of things, laid at her doorstep because she was a very private person. Unlike other, female stars who came later who suffered, she suffered as well, but she kept her pain to herself, and so she did not allow anybody to come near her. So it is only through these letters that she wrote to Svetoslav that I discovered how the early Indian cinema was born, especially Bombay talkies, where the birth took place, how both she and Himanshu worked so hard. They worked in Germany, they worked in the UK, how they struggled to fundraise, how she had to sell all her jewelry, all her good clothes, everything, So they had to literally starve in the early years. So, when we think of her as this glamorous figure, we think, oh, she got it all on a platter. She's the great grandniece of Tagore. Himanshu Rai was her husband, but she suffered a lot. And I'm sure we will come to that later about her personal suffering when she was also a victim of domestic abuse by Himanshu. So these were things which I discovered. So when you talk about, let me just address very quickly how I dealt with with how they set up Bombay talkies. And I think there both Himanshu and she worked as a team. This is not commonly acknowledged by anybody, but if you go through the Bombay talkies papers, if you go through her, which I've put in the book, if you go through her letters, you realize the very, very key role that she played. Why was she so important? She was so important because she was amongst the first educated women who came from a very illustrious family, who stepped into Indian cinema. And she and Himanshu had decided that whenever they set up their own studio, they would hire educated people. This was a revolution. This had never happened before. And they actually tried very hard to do this. And the reason why they were so keen was because Bombay Talkies was going to be a private limited company in which people could hold shares. And in order to attract investors, they wanted to take it away from the bad reputation it had, because many of the actresses, especially of that period, who were working there at that time, came from sort of dubious backgrounds. Nothing against that. They were also pioneers, but it meant that investors did not want to come anywhere near the film industry because they thought it was populated by women who were mostly prostitutes, okay, or courtesans, or, they looked down upon them. So the arrival of Devika transformed Indian cinema in many ways. There were others also at that time, but she was at that time the biggest star and the biggest name. She was also very beautiful. So as a result, she became the face of Bombay Talkies, and we have to acknowledge that. Rakhee, one more thing I want to say is she worked very, very hard. There was not a time when she would stop working, and as a result of which, in every year they made at least 3 films, and this was a big thing for any studio to produce 3 films and also have around 400 people working in the studio full time.
Yeah, surely you to talk about that structure very beautiful, and I think I observe that, and that is a very strong point of the book. Apart from, as you rightly said right now, Kishwar, is the fact that educated women could also take part in the entertainment industry, particularly in cinema industry, is something that you focus upon, as which is a very good point. I mean, you talk about the earlier women. In fact, you talk at length about that. Inakshi comes in and how Himanshu tries to play on that, and then comes Devika Rani herself. So also juxtaposing somewhere her personal life, then the film industry around her through Himanshu, the man-woman relationship, the gender aspect, where how of course the whole woman power, so to say, in the male-dominated world, where you saw a lot of male characters, but very few women, especially strong within quotes women who were fiercely and confidently getting into the cinematic world. That is something very beautiful. Let me also inform the audience here, the viewers here, that this is the same Kishwar Desai who's known for a partition museum. So this through this book, as I would say also, is that she's preserving the film history through Devika Rani, parts of history that the cinema industry in India has gone through. The whole structure that she talks about, which she just kind of focused upon. I mean, the kind of fundraising which happened, the kind of funding it came, the kind of different characters, for example, right from screenwriters to producers to people who are investors in that era. So, which is very important. Of course, you talk about the letters, which are very valuable because you painstakingly researched on that and sourced it, as you said, through your travels. You title it The Longest Kiss. I mean, of course, something which is a part of the film and a very important point. Why do you think that really became the most strong point to become the title of the book?
Rakhee, there are 2-3 points here. One is that, yes, uh, for a long time, the longest kiss in Indian cinema, Devika and Himanshu held the record for it, because this features in their first film together, first and last actually, called Karma, because after that Himanshu stopped acting and became a producer. Devika, of course, carried on. As I said, this was in 1933. It must have shocked many people to see the sari-clad woman, literally lying on top of a man and kissing him, and people at that time when they saw it, I think they were so shocked they thought it must have been at least 5 minutes. But I have timed it, Rakhee, and it is only about 2 minutes. But still, because as you know, kissing got a very bad name in Indian industry and in the film industry, and later on it was banned. So hers is the kiss that is probably the most memorable. I call it the longest kiss because One is her own passion, which I wanted to bring out in this book, because she gave up a lot. She gave up her family. She gave up, even the Tagore name. A lot of people didn't know that she was the great grandniece of Rabindranath Tagore. She just worked extremely hard. She used to go to office, to the studio at 8 in the morning and come back only late at night. And there were many incidents in which she was sick. She had 104 temperature, yet she would go. There were times when she couldn't dance because she had her periods, and or she couldn't act because it was a difficult time for her. And yet she carried on. She would be unwell in many ways, but she felt that her passion for cinema, she could not give up. And so I think those are the things that I wanted to bring in. And another reason why I call it the longest kiss is, yes, because of the romance in her life. Of course, initially she fell in love with Himanshu, and those of you who've read the book, and you, of course, Rakhi, would see that it was something where she was a very young girl in her early 20s. He is 16 years older than her, and he becomes like her guru. He trains her. They go together. They learn about the talkies, because the talkies arrive whilst they start making cinema together. She starts with him in silent cinema, and then they graduate to the talkies, and they are working together. But it is also a time of heartbreak and betrayal, because that is when she realizes that Himanshu has not quite been honest with her, that he does have a child, it seems, from another woman. And and she stumbles upon this knowledge quite by accident. And I have the letters where, these, where the other woman writes and asks, they were not married, but definitely it appears from the letters that Himanshu had a child whom he had not acknowledged. And then later on, or at least publicly acknowledged and let her know about it as well. Perhaps he did share that with her later, but this, of course, was a reason for earlier heartbreak for her. And then he, unfortunately, the pressure of making cinema in those days meant not only all the fundraising that you had to do, but in Himanshu's case, he also had to get together this whole team along with Devika and set up the studio, etc. So maybe along the way, the pressures were too much, and he showed signs of an early nervous breakdown in which he started physically abusing her. And this is a very sad period in her life, because he beats her up, and she is left bleeding on the floor. Now, this was for me a huge shock. I would have never believed that this gorgeous woman, who looked like she had all the happiness in the world, was actually being extremely badly ill-treated by her husband. And this happened not once, but many times. And she says that in her letters to Svetoslav Rorik, who was her second husband, that, this was so terrible, but in a way she was grateful. She actually uses those words, that this happened to her, because she said it toughened her up, and it made her resilient. It made her able to withstand all the blows that life had in place for her, because it was not easy for her ever since Himanshu started behaving like this. And there were challenges in the studio, because then she had to deal with his death. And so I'm talking about the romance, why I called it the longest kiss. And then there is another person whom she falls in love with. Again, probably not a very suitable character, because he is her junior. He is a director. He's a screenplay writer and then a director called Amaya Chakravarti. But unfortunately, he has tuberculosis. So this is another thing which I discovered. And she is so wonderful, in a sense, all the men that she loves, she's very, very loyal, just like nobody knew what was happening between her and Himanshu. There were rumors, but people didn't know. People had an idea that she was involved with Amaya, but what they didn't know was that she was actually quietly taking him for curing his tuberculosis, taking him to various, sanatoriums. In those days in India, you had sanatoriums for this. And of course, there are many other romances where people fall in love with her, but ultimately, her biggest romance is the perfect man that she ever wanted to meet. That is Svetoslav Rorik, whom she meets as she wants to exit Indian cinema, and she manages to meet this wonderful guy, and she becomes a recluse after that. So I have on the cover of the book the kiss that she shares with Himanshu from the film Karma, and I have in the last chapter, just before that, is a sketch that is made by Svetoslav Rorik of her of Devika and Svetoslav exchanging a kiss. So it is kind of saying the longest kiss because her impact on Indian society, people wanted to be like her. She was so glamorous, so gorgeous. So even on the side of the audience, they exchanged this passion for Devika. She was considered the most beautiful woman on the Indian screen. So for those very many reasons, I felt that a title like The Longest Kiss would be the best one to give to this book.
Yeah, and in fact, when you're talking about the different kind of men that she loved and so passionately and so truly, you were also talking about love, which has a very universal and very honest appeal, and not really putting any such moral barriers or boundaries here, but saying that how one celebrates love in its true sense. I mean, whether one you're married to, one you're maybe not, and one that you actually finally also find love in, and you finally be together in terms of
Raki,
marital.
I have to say, I missed out one in the middle, which is Najmul Hassan, whom she runs away with, and this is actually when you say that her love was courageous. She did not try and hide it. She kept it very open, and that was Devika. She was a private person, but her love affairs were not very well hidden, I have to say, because Najmul Hassan was her co-star. And when I suspect when the treatment from Himanshu became too much for her, she ran away with him very publicly. But you know what? She came back to Bombay Talkies with her head held high, and she gave hit after hit. So it was not as though, she was somebody who came back looking like, totally sort of forlorn and shamefaced over what she had done. She never felt like a victim. She was always a survivor. And she felt, yes, I had fallen in love. But then I came back because I felt the studio was important. And then she carries on working for the studio. And as I said, all the films that she gives to us after that are super hits, especially the ones that she does with Ashok Kumar. Of course, that's another story. But after she ran away and she comes back, they can never hire Najmul Hussain again. And so they decide to bring into the limelight this very scrawny, thin, very nervous young man whom we all know now as the very accomplished Ashok Kumar, whom he later became.
Yeah, and in fact, when you start introducing Devika Rani, the 17-year-old girl, the kind of lineage and legacy that she comes from, as you mentioned also, and we know to Rabindranath Tagore, and from this whole thing which was inside her, this maybe ambition which she had suppressed, but which she comes through because of Himanshu and becomes an actress of repute, and then she finds love. She battles with her own personal travails and tragedies, and then of course triumphs. So I think there are too many layers of personality also, which you beautifully touch upon, Kishwar, in this book, and which should be really celebrated also. Talk about the kind of experiences that you went through while discovering those letters, understanding a woman, as you say. We are also looking at, when you look at this whole gender pay gap, for example, even in film industry, you talk about the salary structure when she signs the contract, and how she as an actress is also bound to do certain things. So an actress in a cinema world, I mean, we talk about it today also, some of them have talked about it today as well, and how they find their own feat of self-reliance, of finding self-financing modes. Talk about that, the empowerment coming through not only celebrating creativity through by acting, but also earning money.
Yeah, I think money was always very important for Devika because very early on in her relationship with Himanshu, she realized that she had sold everything that she owned that was of any value, which included her jewelry, her clothes, as I mentioned, when they were together in Germany and they were on the point of starvation. I think somewhere along that point, she realized that money is very important. But unfortunately for her, Himanshu was calling the shots. He was actually taking her salary, especially after she ran away and came back. All her salary used to go to Himanshu. And she never really minded, I think, at that time, because they were as a couple. And her passion and dream, as much as it was his passion and dream, was really Bombay Talkies. So you will be shocked, Rakhi, that when he died, and he, she nursed him till the end. And the reason I know that, that he was actually receiving psychiatric care and so on, is that I have all the hospital bills of the clinic where he was admitted. So he had been under treatment both for his physical ailments and his mental ailments for about 3 years before he died. And she was not the only one that he was violent towards. He was also violent towards on set with another technician, and he hit him so hard that he lost his hearing forever, the technician. So, and then when another colleague tried to leave, Himanshu ran after him and almost, broke the windscreen and dragged out the he was living in a car, steering wheel. And so he had become an extremely violent person. And so she had to deal with all of that. So when he died, thanks to all the medical expenses and everything, they had no money. So the bank balance was barely 100 rupees. And that is where I think she realizes how important it is for a woman. She'd always known that, for a woman to be, economically independent. But imagine that, Rakhi, she's a widow. She's a widow in her early 30s, working as an actress and as a heroine. And she has to very often play roles where she's a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old, so half her age. And yet she's doing it extremely successfully. But the strain of it, because she could have been thrown out, and indeed she was being marginalized in the studio. So what does she do? First thing she does is try and get Himanshu's insurance. Now, these are things which most people would say, oh my God, look at her. She is so evil. He's barely dead. And she goes and she starts. But these were practical matters. She gets his insurance. She redesigns her own fee structure with the help of the people at Bombay Talkies. She takes her management role much more seriously. And you know what? Despite the fact that she is facing extreme opposition, I won't go into the details because it's a very complicated story of how she actually gets hold of Bombay Talkies. Bombay Talkies has a two-layer setup. One is, of course, the shareholders, which are in Bombay Talkies. And then there is another set of smaller shareholders who actually control Bombay Talkies, who are the managing agents. She becomes part of the managing agents, and that's how she changes her fortune. So she becomes, ultimately, she throws out all her enemies. There were lots of people who wanted to throw her out of Bombay Talkies and take over because it was a gold mine after her husband died. But instead, she turns everything against them and manages to get control, manages to become the manager of Bombay Talkies and the head of all productions. Now, this is unheard of. I have not seen as yet in Indian cinema history of a professionally run studio where there is the lead actress who is also the head
Very
manager,
important.
as well as this, So, so these were things which she did in order to stabilize her own economic situation. And by the time she meets Svetoslav, she is a very wealthy woman. So you can see that within 4 years, because Himanshu dies in 1940 and she meets Svetoslav in 1944, she has turned her fortunes around. She's still a very successful actress, but she also is a very wealthy woman.
Okay, and I must also show to the viewers, this is how the book looks like, The Longest Kiss, and thanks to Westland also, and to you, Kishwar. Page number 190, in fact, I have read the whole book, but one line which actually also sums up what you're trying to say is that Nevika never thought of herself as only an actress. So there are too many layers to this woman, as you say. Somebody who's well-read, not really education as such much, but then somebody who understands life. She's wise, she's sensible, she's sensitive, and she brings to the fore this womanhood also in a very true sense, where the womanhood does not make her frail, but strong, basically, to lead,
and she's a very
to
good
understand
manager.
people.
Yeah, she's a
Yeah.
very, very good manager, and she gets in lots of people, in order to work well at Bombay Talkies, because the other blow which hits them is that all her enemies get together and they leave Bombay Talkies and they start a rival studio called Filmistan. But you know what? She doesn't allow it for a minute to affect her, because she just goes out and gets more and more investors in Bombay Talkies. That's what I love about her. I love that spirit of just hitting back. She was not a Meena Kumari sitting and drinking herself into
Yeah.
alcoholism. She was not a
Or what I
Madhubala
call the
in
Nilufar
there.
Rai
Yeah,
variety, where
she
you
was.
shed tears
Yeah,
and
she was
tears.
fighting. She was fighting back. She was not a Guru Dutt falling apart. She was fighting back. She kept on saying that, look, this is my legacy. This is a studio I built. I am not going to let it just go down. So these are the things, Rakhi. Yes, it was very difficult. So my own journey writing this book, I just want to say a few lines about it. It was very tough. I've already told you 15 years. But even the writing of it, what you've said, the layers, there was nothing. I had nothing, no template to go by because there have been no biographies on Devika before this. So I literally, it was like a jigsaw puzzle. So my whole house where I'm sitting right now was just covered with paper. I would take out, and I had about 4,000 different documents to go through. So I would just put them down date wise, and then pull in other things like, reviews, newspaper articles, interviews that I might have taken with various people, and like keep on piecing the whole thing together and piecing together her story. So, I really do hope that people, and you've seen that I've got some original one, not some,
I
I
know.
just got a lot of original documents, including the first letter that Prithvi Raj Kapoor writes to her saying that, please, can you give a chance to my son, Ranbir Raj Kapoor. I didn't know Raj Kapoor's first name
You've
was
mentioned
Ranbir.
that.
Yeah. So, and the letter that Dilip Kumar
Madan
carried
Mohan
with him.
also, yeah.
Madan Mohan writes to her, begging her to be that he should be given a chance, but she didn't want to give a chance to Madan Mohan because she did feel that Madan Mohan's father had not been very nice to her. The thing is the double standards. Himanshu used to have affairs and get away with it. But in her case, she had only one affair. When I know it's difficult, it's a difficult thing for us to say even now, only one affair.
No,
But
no, we
it
can
was only the
talk
one
about it
time.
today. Today's the day.
Yeah, she had only that one time and she ran away with this guy. And Rakhi, what a guy. He was so good looking. This Najmul Hussain was one of the handsomest actors of his time. And she ran away. So she had very good choice. She ran away with him and nobody ever forgave her. She became a, adulterous woman, a loose woman. The rumors would just carry on about her all the time, which is why when they hired Ashok Kumar to play opposite her, they wanted somebody who looked petrified of her all the time. They wanted somebody who was
Amorous.
totally, yes, that she would not be attracted to at all. And then, of course,
Okay.
Ashok became a great actor and very well groomed.
Yeah, sure. Also talk about the whole work that you did during the times of COVID-19. As you say that, you really, all these newspaper cuttings around you. Did you also manage to talk to some of the relatives, people who were close to her, and kind of get perspective on her, the other side, some of the untouched sides that we
Yeah.
don't know much about, but you write about it in your book?
Yeah, you know what, Raki, I'll be very honest. I spoke to a lot of people, including her relatives, including Himanshu's relatives. But what I discovered was that, they didn't know very much about the two of them because even when Himanshu came back, both of them were based, as I told you, in the initial years in Europe. They were in Germany and then they were in London. And when they came back in 1933, 34, and set up Bombay Talkies, they were both based mostly in Bombay. She had completely cut herself off from her family, especially her mother. I have a feeling that her mother did not quite approve because I have those letters where she gets married and the relatives are saying, your mother just found out when she looked at the newspaper cutting that we had sent her of the Hindu, and that's how they find out that Devika's got married for the first time to Himanshu. So she was not very close. And because of the monetary situation, in a sense that Himanshu's family was also not very well off at that time. Later on, they became, of course, extremely well off. But the parents required money. And somehow that created, as you saw in my book, also some friction between, Devika and Himanshu, though they were very close to Himanshu's mother. But what I discovered when I did those interviews is that people didn't know very much about them. So therefore, my struggle was to find out. Luckily, as I said, I got these very, very long letters, passionate letters between Devika and Himanshu, but I also got other letters. I got letters from people who had worked on the production of, of many of Himanshu and Devika's films. And so from all of that, I could then begin to get a better understanding of the reality of what they were. So it was extremely hard work. Because of COVID, I couldn't go anywhere. So in fact, COVID is the reason why this book actually got finished. I had started writing it about 10 years ago, and I'd written the first 2, 3 chapters, but then I stopped because I got busy with, as you mentioned, the Partition Museum, and we had a deadline to set that up and to run it. And so COVID was for me the ideal situation. I couldn't go anywhere. Nobody could come and do chadu pocha in the house. My papers could lie around the way they were. My family was extremely sweet and accommodating. And so for 8 months, 8 or 9 months, this is all I did. I worked on Devika from morning to night, sometimes till midnight, sometimes till 2 in the morning, because I was determined. I said, this year I have to finish this book. And sometimes, Rakhee, things don't get done unless you give yourself a very, very firm deadline. And I felt that her story needed to be told now more than ever, because, as you mentioned, we have a lot of narratives about Indian women in cinema till today who have to face many challenges. And you know what? She used to get anonymous letters all the time threatening her and threatening to do all kinds, just like women get trolled today. But you know what Devika used to do? She would preserve every letter. These days we advise these young actresses, oh, tum wo chitti mat padna, tumhara to, dil toot jayega, ye wo. She had no such qualms. She would keep those letters, and they were kept in a file called anonymous, and
No, in
some of
fact,
those
I
letters.
remember the whole chapter where you talk about how she discovers, she finds that letter, he wrote to another woman, and then, she feels like really shocked, shell shocked, but she controls herself, wipes her tears, and she stands strong, and she says how to handle it now,
Yeah.
whatever is
So
in
she
front
doesn't
of us.
hide. She doesn't hide from. So there I find that she was really brilliant. She was a very strong, and that's another reason why I wrote this book, because I feel that we, especially after COVID, sometimes we feel we're very frail. What we've gone through is terrible. But when you read an inspirational story like this of a woman who used to be brutally beaten up by her husband and yet had to give this very graceful performance the next day on screen and not utter a word about it, and many other things as well that she suffered, which are in the book. And I felt that because she was so strong, we can take inspiration from her story, especially today, and especially for the entertainment industry when we think things are so tough. Just fight back. Read this book, it'll give you the energy to fight back.
No, and I must say, for the benefit of the viewers, that this whole research really lends huge credibility to the book, a book which is well researched, and I mean, the letters that you see, very original letters there, the kind of lineage that she traces, who her parents were, who her siblings were, and the whole life history of two people also. And through Himanshu, you also get to know the whole idea of and the structure of filmmaking there, where you talk about that narrative of that period when cinema was being made, where Kishwar, it was also an intellectual exercise backed by people who believed in this project, so to say, a creative medium, but also backed by people who had money but who believed in these creative elements.
Absolutely. And
From there to today, how would you see the journey also? I mean, cinema as it
yeah,
was and today.
what surprises me is that in this book you see early Indian cinema, and this is already cinema which is being run like a corporate, because they have board meetings. And not only do I have letters, but I also have the minutes of the board meetings in which some very, very crucial and important decisions were taken. So, if you look at who were on the board of directors, and I don't think there are very many companies in cinema even today who have the kind of illustrious board of directors that Bombay Talkies had, including, for that time, a British gentleman called Sir Richard Temple, who himself came from a very
Yeah.
illustrious lineage. So Bombay Talkies was very, very well respected because Setalvad, who was Sir Chimanlal Setalvad, who was one of the best known and probably the richest lawyer of that time, he was the chair of Bombay Talkies. And along with him, he brought in all the other people, Parsis mostly, who were, very close to the British. And they were also part of and they were the initial investors. So, in order to get that prime investment, you can imagine how much respect that both Himanshu and Devika would have commanded at that time, because you cannot do that. And when Himanshu dies and we have all those troubles that take place, the Parsis leave, but Devika manages to get the Marwaris to come and invest. So she does not ever stop. She keeps on looking at the situation and trying to see how can she improve it. So the point I'm trying to make is that initially it was a very, very well respected studio, and it remained that way even after Himanshu died, because she managed always through her connections. She was extremely well connected, because by that time, she had been in Bombay for about 10 years. And so she was able to bring in the governor, adored her, everybody was halfway in love with her. Everybody was willing to do anything, for Achut Kanya. Nehru actually came to the cinema hall and watched the film sitting by her side. And of course, he was at that time not the prime minister, because this is pre-partition. He later on became the prime minister. But what I'm saying is, those were the kind of people that they attracted, the top of. So when I look at Indian cinema today, I think, yes, it has come full circle. This was the point that Himanshu and Devika had wanted to bring to Indian industry. They wanted to bring that respectability. And the other big thing is they wanted to bring foreign technicians. They did
Exactly.
that. A lot of their people who worked in the studio were British, they were German. And again, we have come full circle, because now we do have that kind of international making of Indian cinema that you see in Bombay. So, and in between, when Devika leaves, black money has already come in. And I'm saying this is pre-partition. So you can imagine how much worse the situation would have been later on, when there was a lot of turmoil following partition, and a lot of studios fell apart and everything had to be rebuilt. But that was the point at which they had left it, at a very beautiful point, where the studio itself, it had 400 employees, but it was run in a very disciplined fashion. As I mentioned in my book, at 9 o'clock in the morning, the bell would ring, everybody would assemble. It was like a school. They would go through their parts, everything. Then by the evening, the bell would ring again. And a lot of people were living on the premises in Malad, where Bombay Talkies was set up. So, these were things which they did. And these are very much ways in which India and Indian filmmakers are looking at Indian cinema today, because we get very
So,
excited today when our film is being shown abroad, but these guys had already been there and done that, and that was always
seriously,
their dream.
I think that
Yeah.
part really impressed me and kind of made me more curious also, and interesting also, because you talk about those collaborations and those technicians, German to British to others. You also talk about the importance of screenwriting. For example, if you look at
Yeah.
Niranjan Pal, who dabbles with different stuff and then also looks at screenwriting. So the whole idea of how writing in cinema should happen. Also you talk about theater, the background that Himanshu had, and importance of it all. So different layers of cinema, which makes it more interesting. Also, at the same time, those layers which what we call underbelly, which sometimes is not really seen by many, but which is there. The darker secrets coming out of skeletons out of the cupboard, so to say. All those dark layers also you touch upon, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you're very right to touch upon the importance of screenplay writing. And here it is very, very crucial to point out that both Niranjan Pal, who was, of course, the son of the very famous freedom fighter, and
Bipin
he
Chandpal,
was.
yeah.
Yes, and he was in fact in London at that time. He had run. His father had taken him away to London. So this is another side story which runs through my book. How Niranjan Pal lands up in London, because he actually almost attacks a European on a train, and his father, in order to protect him, takes him away to London, which had become actually the hub of a lot of people, including Savarkar. And Savarkar and Niranjan Pal actually shared the same residence. And so Niranjan comes under the influence of Savarkar, but then he realizes that he cannot take a violent path in order to get freedom, which is what Savarkar at that time was advising. And so he leaves that, and he becomes, through gradually, a theater play, a theater lover, a theater goer, and then slowly a playwright. At a very young age, his plays are beginning to be staged on the West End. Again, a forgotten history for us. And Himanshu is an actor in one of Niranjan Pal's plays. That's how they meet. And once they meet there, the rest is history, because then they become a duo, and then they do their first film together, which is called The Light of Asia. And so this is again a very interesting phase where West End, can you imagine an Indian playwright, an Indian actor getting, a thunderous applause on West End, and the play runs for weeks and weeks and months. Rakhi, we've forgotten all this. So now when an
No,
Indian
in fact,
film screen,
I remember that paragraph, Kishwar, where you talk about Himanshu going to the restaurant, and with a kind of confident smile, he's looking at all the reviews, and he's feeling so happy, and like a victorious man there. That description, I really liked that. The whole energy that comes through when you read good reviews about your work. You talk about
and
that
this is the
also.
1920s. In the 1920s, so we're talking 100 years ago, Indians were producing excellent theater on West End. और आज अगर हमारा कोई प्ले उधर कोई देख लेता है तो हम तो बोलते पता नहीं क्या ये तो
Yeah,
100 साल
exactly.
पहले की कहानी है.
It's
Before
also
Twitter, before
tribute
social
to
media.
great creative
Yes,
talent, so to say,
yes.
the kind of
They,
deeper intellectual
yeah,
aura
yeah,
that it had,
yeah.
isn't it?
And I think the ability to command respect for it, if you have the talent, both Niranjan and Himanshu were able to get investment abroad. They were able to get people to believe in them. And as I said, this was before social media, before anything else came on the scene. They were able to just do it on the basis of their sheer talent. And people believed in them. And they actually backed them both in Germany and in the UK, in Britain. And that was how they grew, and how, of course, it was a huge struggle even then, but they managed so well. I mean, one should be very proud of them instead of forgetting this history completely.
Exactly. Actually, and through this book, this comes through very well, and I think through their own sometimes statements, this is very reflective of those times where intellectual, capabilities were respected so much, and everybody
Yes.
looked meticulously at smaller things to make it perfect and work on those things also.
You're
Talking
so
about
right.
the second
Yeah.
love and the whole Russian connection, you talk about how she felt nice. And here we are actually looking at the other side of an actress where she wants to have a leisurely life on her own, talking about her walks in the garden, and taking a little relaxed kind of time with herself, which she really loved and wanted. And she felt very loved, with her second marriage, so to say. So talk about that. And you talk about all those letters between the two also. So talk about this whole,
Very,
when
very.
you,
Yeah,
yeah.
the letters are extremely passionate. Some of them run into many, many, many pages. But what I want to say about this period in her life, she's 36, close to 37. I mean, she's 37, 38, I would say, by the time she meets Svetoslav Rorik. Yet she is still acting. She is still running Bombay Talkies with an iron fist. And she's going to the studio every day at 8 in the morning, as was her routine always. Rarely taking a holiday, very meticulous about her work, as you mentioned. But there was something missing in her life, because obviously she was extremely lonely. She did have Amaya Chakravarti, but because of his tuberculosis, I suspect she was little worried about him and how far could this relationship really go. And along comes this extremely handsome, extremely talented Russian, Svetoslav Rorik, who's already well-established artist in his own right. Now, Svetoslav comes from a very illustrious family, the Roriks. Some of you may have visited Nagar, where they used to have their home. And they also were extremely intellectually inclined. And I think this was a part of Devika's life that she always felt had been missed out, because in all this hurly-burly of cinema making and rushing, and they had to make 3 films a year, and it's always, difficult to do that. Here was a guy who comes along, and they hit it off right from the first moment they meet. And in their letters, it's very clear, because they say that, look, we felt like we had known each other. So almost it was destined, you can say. And that is how their letters start, because they start by just expressing their joy at having met a fellow traveler, a soul that was very much akin to each other. And so they begin to share their deepest and their darkest secrets, which they have never talked to anybody else about. And then their spiritual journeys, because Svetoslav also has a very spiritual side, because of his parents and the way they are, they're very spiritually inclined. And so they begin to go into this. But the most important part of this relationship, Rakhi, is something he gives to her, which no other man had ever given, is that, one, he does not want to exploit her in any way. And secondly,
Okay.
he respects her. He respects her. This is the most important. So even when she tells him that, look, you don't know who I am, you don't know what all I've done, you don't know where I've been, and the kind of horrible things that have been done to me, and you wouldn't want to have anything to do with me if you knew that. She says all this to him. And he says, look, that is the past. I don't care. You are in front of me now, and that's all I want. That is one. Secondly, when she even tells him about the kind
Yeah.
of job she has held in the past before she comes to cinema, she used to do makeup for ladies in Bond Street and things, very like just to earn a bit of pocket money when she was a young girl. And he says, you know what? I really respect that, because I think you are a working woman, and I respect a woman who can stand on her own feet. And Svetoslav is an extremely wealthy person. He doesn't need to say any of this, because he's extremely rich, and he has probably never known anything like deprivation in his entire life, because he and his family were aristocrats from Russia, and they came away with a vast fortune to India. And yet he says this to her, that, he respects her. So I think this is where their love for each other begins to blossom. And she realizes that
Okay.
at last she's found somebody who likes her, loves her for who she is, and doesn't want anything from her.
This is like a 360-degree, view of a life of a woman, an actress, a woman also of courage, a woman of varied characters, but also flair for creativity and interest and love for life, to celebrate it through her relationships, through her own acting, through her own handling of a cinema production company. I would like to see Devika Rani, and I think through your book, which we are thankful for, Kishwar, is presents so many layers of this personality. And I think through your book, you bring out that personality, and it's such a treat for us. And what a day! But today, I must reiterate it again, like 14th Feb today, that we are celebrating life. I won't say restricting only to love and romance, but life in general, of everything beautiful around us, the warmth around us. And through this book, I think you reflect many of those aspects. I don't see many questions coming up. If there are any, you're welcome to ask. I don't see much on screen. So tell us about the kind of roadmap ahead. I mean, Devika Rani's life would tell you what? I mean, and what would you pick up, Kishwar, as your own message as a writer, but also, let's say, keep apart the writing and a writer, the observer, as you see her?
Well, I think my message for anybody who wants to read the book, or to, because I don't write the book for messaging, anything at all, because I think her life is what we receive the message from. The fact that you must face up to any kind of hardship that may come your way, be strong. And what Devika did was she made a pact with God, and she believed very much in Saint Anthony, and she used to write these letters and things to him all the time, saying that,
Mm-hmm.
please, I will go through whatever trials and tribulations, whatever suffering you give to me, I am willing to take it. But at the end of it, Please give me a reward. And I think that was what she thought Svetoslav was when he came into her life. He came as a reward. But you know what I want to say here very quickly is that, as we were saying right in the beginning, love is never easy. So when we think on a day like this, very romantic Valentine's Day, that our lives, we fall in love, everything is going to be fine. But it isn't that way. So even in Devika's case, yes, she had her life, you can say, had the filmy happy ending. She meets the guy of her dreams, the man whom she can be completely compatible with. But what happens after that? They lead a very good life, but unfortunately, Svetoslav's parents pass away quite soon after they meet. His brother also dies in Russia, so he's left quite by himself. So he had this very close-knit family. So it's only Devika and him. And he goes through a very bad time emotionally. So Devika plays the same role that she had played with Himanshu. She becomes not only his muse, but also his support. So she keeps on encouraging him and making him paint again. He even stops painting, which was his life. So, she gives him enormous support. But right at the end of their lives comes a real tragedy when they, because they're an elderly couple living by themselves in Tataguni, which is an enormous estate. I don't know if any one of you have been there, but it's a gorgeous, enormous 400-acre estate outside of Bangalore, and where they were, where they were living, and they had the most amazing art collection and collection of textiles and coins and things like that. And people literally exploited them and sold them and tricked this elderly couple into giving away a lot of their collection. So unfortunately, the last few years of her life were a little sad. And at the end, when she dies, there emerged not just one will, but 5 wills, and there's a big tussle over her property and who it actually belongs to. And so Bombay Talkies, I don't know if you visited it, Rakhi, but it's heartbreaking. It lies in ruins today. It's a beautiful building, and you can just see the ruined
Yeah.
structure of what it was. And when I went to Tataguni, and in fact, I capture some of that feeling in the last chapter of my book, when I went there and I saw their graves, both
Sure.
Svetoslav and Devika,
Okay.
I did get the feeling that maybe she had a lot of things to do still. And unfortunately, both age
You,
as well as all these
yeah,
exploitative
and you know
people
what?
took it away.
And in the end, as we are wrapping up, I would say that she talks about initially in her early days that how she was into makeup and good dressing and fashion, and I would say the veil of this whole glamour also, which of course she represented. She was beautiful, comes out of the talent which is also there, and that is
Yes,
Devika Rani. So
that is
so
Devika
thank you
Rani.
so
Yes.
much, Kishwar. I think we'll have more discussions whenever I think it's possible. Thanks to Westland, thanks to you, thanks to KLF for bringing out this beautiful interaction also. Because through this book and through talking to Kishwar, I think we're also discussing and having this conversation on life, beauty, romance, courage, women empowerment, and the embodiment of again humanity and compassion also, apart from creative talent. So thank you so much, Kishwar, once again. And thank you to the whole KLF team and all the very best to all of you out there.
Thank you. Thank you, KLF. Thank you, Rakhi. It's been great
Thank you
talking to
so
you. Please
much.
read my book.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. Buy the book. Please read it. It's very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.